What if the most powerful change you could make came from a place where no one would ever expect it? Meet Grace Whitmore, a woman who spent years erasing the stains left behind by others. But what the world didn't know was that Grace had been quietly rewriting history from the shadows of the Capitol. A former constitutional lawyer, now a janitor, Grace holds the key to a bill that will shake the very foundation of justice in America. This is the story of resilience, hidden brilliance, and the fight for justice. A fight that no one saw coming, until it was too late. Stay tuned as we unravel the untold story of She Wrote It in the Dark. If you love stories about courage, justice, and defying the odds, you're in the right place. But before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that will inspire and move you. Have you ever felt overlooked or underestimated? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. We want to hear your story too. Now let's begin. She Wrote It in the Dark follows the inspiring journey of Grace Whitmore, a black woman who, after being pushed to the margins of society, works as a janitor in a government office in Arkansas. Unbeknownst to her colleagues, Grace is a former constitutional lawyer, her brilliant career erased by political forces. In the quiet shadows of the Capitol, Grace begins to write a transformative bill that will challenge the very system that abandoned her. As the bill moves through the legislative process, Grace's secret is revealed, and she must confront the powers that tried to silence her. This story is a testament to the power of resilience, knowledge, and the courage to fight for justice, even when the world has forgotten you. With a gripping mix of mystery, empowerment, and social change, She Wrote It in the Dark reminds us that real power often comes from the most unexpected places. The fluorescent lights flickered above the marble floors of the Arkansas State Capitol, humming like a tired ghost. The echo of footsteps, papers rustling, and distant laughter from offices mixed with the swish of a mop gliding in practiced arcs. Grace Whitmore moved quietly through the East Wing, the patch on her janitor's uniform reading only G. Whitmore. Most people didn't read it. Most people didn't look at her face long enough to notice she wasn't just cleaning. She was watching. Every morning started the same. She clocked in before the sun rose, her work boots damp from the dew and her eyes a little heavier than the day before. She would greet the security guards with a soft smile and receive a nod in return, not unfriendly but impersonal, as though her smile was part of the building's decor. She knew their names. They didn't know hers. The Capitol was a cold place, not in temperature but in spirit. It gleamed with polished ambition and whispered schemes, its walls soaked in decades of power and pride. The lawmakers and their aides rushed past her, coffee cups in hand, talking fast and loud about votes and pressure and press time. When they passed Grace, they lowered their voices. Sometimes they didn't bother. Once, a junior aide dropped a legal pad at her feet, looked at her as though she were a piece of furniture and said, "You don't mind, do you?" without waiting for an answer. She picked up the notepad. Read the top line of text. Smiled faintly. It was an amateur draft of a redistricting map. She'd written better drafts in the back of courtrooms 2 decades ago. She placed the pad on the desk where he'd come from, cleaner than before, and returned to her cart. No one noticed. Beneath her uniform, beneath her silence, Grace was still the woman she had been before. A constitutional scholar whose name once echoed in courtroom halls and journal citations. She had argued before the Supreme Court when she was just 35, challenging mandatory minimums with a voice so precise it was like steel dipped in honey. But that was another life. A life traded for one with less betrayal and more peace. Or so she had hoped. Now, her courtroom was this marble labyrinth. Her law library, a stack of weathered books hidden inside a storage closet behind the maintenance hall. Her drafting desk, a small table by the utility sink with an old typewriter she found abandoned in a basement archive. When others went home, she stayed. When the Capitol slept, she wrote. No one knew. Or almost no one. On the 3rd floor, in the Office of Legislative Affairs, a young intern named Maya Barnes watched Grace from a distance. Maya was in her early 20s, sharp-eyed and quiet. The only black woman in the department. She had noticed how Grace never flinched when insulted, how she stood straighter than most and looked at the legislative boards on the wall as if she already knew how the votes would fall. That morning, Maya approached Grace in the break room. It was early. The coffee hadn't finished brewing. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" she asked softly. Grace looked up from her cleaning rag, one brow slightly raised. "That's one way of putting it. You always seem like you know more than the rest of them." Grace chuckled. "It's not hard to know more than someone who never looks you in the eye." Maya tilted her head. "What did you do before this?" Grace didn't answer right away. She folded the cloth in her hand, deliberate and slow. "Something else," she said finally. something that didn't keep the floors this clean. Maya wanted to ask more, but the coffee machine dinged and the moment passed. Later that night, while the building emptied and the moon rose over the Arkansas River, Grace returned to her corner. She unlocked the supply closet, pulled out her typewriter and sat with her notes. Her fingers moved over the keys with familiar rhythm. The clack of each letter was quiet thunder. She was building something. Line by line. Word by word. A bill that could change everything, if anyone ever saw it. But they would. One day. And none of them would see her coming. The sound of rain whispered against the Capitol's tall windows as night settled across Little Rock. The janitor's cart rolled silently down a deserted hallway. Grace Whitmore moved like a shadow, unseen and unhurried, her worn boots brushing past the portraits of former governors and judges. She had passed these walls 1,000 times. They had never spoken to her. But they listened. In the back corridor of the building, behind a door marked Storage 3C, Grace had built herself a sanctum. It smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. An industrial lamp lit the small table where her typewriter sat, surrounded by loose pages, highlighters, and law books with spines cracked from overuse. A calendar on the wall bore red circles drawn around the next legislative session, each date narrowing toward a single goal. The document before her was 36 pages long. It bore no title, but its contents were fire. Grace called it the bill, though it had many names in her mind. Redemption. Repair. Return. It was a legislative mosaic pieced together from years of quiet observation and memory. Grace had spent hours listening to hallway conversations, reading discarded drafts, and attending public hearings from the back of the room. She took notes. She cross-referenced laws no one quoted anymore. She remembered cases she had once fought and lost, and why. This bill would dismantle mandatory minimum sentencing for nonviolent offenses. It would restore voting rights to citizens returning from incarceration. It would shift funds from bloated correctional budgets into education and community infrastructure. And in a move few dared to write aloud, it would challenge voter suppression laws under the Arkansas Constitution's own Equal Protection Clause, a clause Grace herself had helped redefine in a landmark case years ago. Her hands hovered above the typewriter. She inhaled, then wrote. Section 1. The state shall not impose a minimum sentence for a nonviolent offense unless a compelling public safety interest is proven beyond reasonable doubt. Each word mattered. Each section was a blow to the systems that had long thrived on silence and distance. This wasn't just legislation. It was a reckoning. Grace stopped only when the clock struck midnight. She tucked the fresh pages into a folder and slid them into a hollow panel behind a loose ceiling tile above the closet door. It was her private vault, hidden from even the most curious eyes. As she replaced the panel, the hallway outside creaked. She turned. No one was there. Except someone had been. Maya Barnes stood around the corner, breathing quietly, her hand frozen just inches from a stack of printouts she had come to retrieve. She had seen Grace disappear into the supply closet and, after curiosity overruled caution, followed. She hadn't meant to spy. She had meant to say goodnight. But what she saw through the narrow door crack stopped her heart. Grace Whitmore, the janitor, surrounded by legal codes, typewritten pages, and annotated drafts, looked nothing like a custodian. She looked like a strategist, a scholar, a storm gathering strength in silence. The next morning, Maya found Grace by the elevators, wiping down brass buttons. I saw you last night, she said quietly. Grace didn't pause. Then I suggest you forget it. I can't, Maya replied. I read one of the pages. Now Grace did stop. She looked at Maya, really looked at her. The young woman's eyes weren't full of threat or arrogance. They were full of wonder. You're writing a bill, aren't you? Maya whispered. Why? Grace leaned closer, her voice low and measured. Because I can. Because no one expects me to. And because if we wait for them to fix it, it'll never be fixed. Maya swallowed. Can I help? Grace studied her for a long moment. Help how? I'm just an intern, Maya said. But I know people. I know which representatives are barely holding their seats and which ones owe favors. I know who's about to retire and wants to leave a legacy. Grace's expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders shifted. Less guarded. Almost impressed. You want to be part of this? She asked. I already am, Maya said. You just didn't know it yet. That night, Grace gave Maya a copy of the bill's first 3 sections. Type. Signed only with the initials G. W. Maya took them with both hands as if holding sacred fire. The blueprint was no longer a secret. It had found its second architect. The Capitol bustled with its usual blend of performance and power, But beneath the surface, a current had begun to shift. Grace Whitmore continued her daily rounds in silence, mop in hand, badge clipped to her collar. But behind the stoop of her back and the measured shuffle of her steps, something new stirred, quiet urgency tethered to hope. Maya, now a willing accomplice in Grace's mission, operated like a spy within the halls she used to walk with only wide eyes and quiet observation. She moved through committee offices, smiled at interns, offered coffee to assistants, and dropped key lines of conversation when the moment was right. "I heard someone's working on a new bill around sentencing reform," she'd say casually, eyes fixed on her screen. "Supposed to be airtight. Real constitutional teeth." She never mentioned Grace. She never had to. The whispers began to build themselves. In the meantime, Grace expanded the bill. She added provisions for public defenders' funding, legal recourse for wrongful convictions, and mandated rehabilitation initiatives for first-time offenders. Her knowledge of the law was still surgical, and her language was ironclad. But progress never comes without resistance. One afternoon, as Grace scrubbed the floor just outside the legislative library, she overheard two aides whispering near the bulletin board. "Who the hell is GW?" one said, holding a red-marked copy of the circulating draft. "No idea," the other replied. "But whoever they are, they've stirred the pot. Representative Clymer's been pacing his office all morning. Says it smells like outside influence. Real radical stuff." Grace didn't blink. She wrung out her mop and kept moving. But inside her chest, her heartbeat picked up pace. They had seen the draft, and it was gaining traction. That night, she met Maya in their makeshift workspace. The younger woman's face was lit by the soft yellow of a desk lamp as she laid out a strategy map, a flow chart of allies, undecideds, and long shots. "Representative Rojas is open to co-sponsoring," Maya said. "He's new and trying to make a name. He was a public defender before this. He just needs cover." "Then he'll need someone to take the first swing," Grace replied. She placed a new page on the table. The preamble. "It's ready." Maya picked it up. Her eyes moved across the lines slowly, reverently. This could really happen," she whispered. Grace gave a quiet nod. "That's why it must stay secret. The moment they know who wrote it, they'll try to bury it with me." But the Capitol had a way of peeling back curtains. Secrets were currency, and the cost of silence rose with every whisper. The following week, Grace noticed a change. People began to stare just a beat longer. A coffee cup was handed to her by someone who had never spoken her name. A law clerk hesitated before tossing a document near her cart. Then came the question. In the copy room, Representative Thomas, an older man with a slow drawl and a reputation for backdoor deals, leaned against the doorway as Grace was replacing the recycling bin. "Tell me something," he said, voice like molasses. "You ever think about politics?" Grace didn't look up. "Every day." He gave a dry chuckle, then walked away without another word. But his tone wasn't amused. It was wary. Later that evening, Maya came rushing into the storage room, her face pale with disbelief. "They know," she said. "Not everyone, but someone powerful. Word is, the Speaker's Chief of Staff requested a full background check on every employee in maintenance." Grace closed her binder calmly. "Then we're running out of time." "What do we do?" Maya asked. "We go faster." They worked through the night. By morning they had a complete bill, clean, aggressive, and morally unignorable. Maya printed a sanitized version with no author and passed it through the legislative pipeline under the radar. And Grace? Grace prepared herself for the storm. She polished the floors outside the chamber with the same care she once gave to legal drafts, her mind 2 steps ahead. They had spent years pretending she didn't exist. Now they would spend the rest of their careers haunted by what she wrote when no one was watching. The draft entered the system quietly, like a whisper in a cathedral. It appeared on the docket for review without attribution. The file number was standard. The content anything but. At first it was treated like a prank, a ghost bill. Staffers passed it around in printouts, highlighting key sections with furrowed brows and raised eyebrows. "This language is surgical," someone said. "Who's the author?" another asked. "No sponsor listed," came the reply. "But it's clean. It meets every requirement." The Capitol's routines buckled under its weight. Lawmakers who typically skimmed through hundreds of documents each week now stopped. They read. They reread. Some were furious. Others were intrigued. Representative Rojas was the first to break cover. He walked into a subcommittee hearing one morning with the bill in hand, dropped it on the table and said, "I want this brought to the floor." His colleagues stared at him like he'd opened a box labeled "Handle with Fire." "You sponsoring it?" someone asked. Rojas hesitated only a moment. "Yes." In a building ruled by ego and optics, this was sacrilege. A nameless bill? With teeth like this? The speaker's office demanded answers. Rojas gave none. All he said was, "It came to me through a trusted source. The content stands for itself." And it did. The legal logic was ironclad. The citations were buried so deep in precedent and constitutional nuance that even the most seasoned legislative analysts found themselves blinking. Within days, think tanks began murmuring. Advocacy groups in Little Rock and Fayetteville started running op-eds. News outlets picked up the scent and called it the invisible bill. Grace watched it all unfold from her quiet perch, card in hand, her face calm, her steps steady. Then came the morning she found her closet door slightly ajar. Nothing was taken. Nothing disturbed. But she knew someone had been inside. She sealed her documents tighter that night. She changed the hiding place for the originals, placing them beneath a false floor panel in the lowest basement room. A room she only accessed with a master key she had duplicated years ago and never used until now. The next day, Maya came to her with sharp eyes and a guarded voice. "They're hunting," she said. "They've narrowed it down. Someone saw me coming out of the maintenance hallway after hours. They asked if I'd been working with anyone on outside proposals. That's how they said it." Grace didn't blink. "Tell them you're just an intern." "I don't want to lie." "You're not. You are just an intern." Maya lowered her voice. "They'll come after you." Grace let out a dry laugh. "They already did. Years ago. They just didn't finish the job." Back in the early 2000s, Grace Whitmore had risen fast. Too fast. A young black woman in constitutional law, arguing civil liberties with a voice that cut through white noise, she was admired, feared, then quietly shoved aside. A scandal fabricated from nowhere. A misfiled motion spun into misconduct. Her name was dragged, her license quietly suspended. Doors closed. Friends evaporated. She disappeared from the courts without a sound. Now they were hearing her again. And they were afraid. As the bill moved toward committee review, a campaign of subtle sabotage began. An anonymous letter claimed the bill was plagiarized. An op-ed in a right-leaning local paper called it the work of an out-of-state radical. The Capitol buzzed with speculation about who really wrote it. A think tank, a political plant, maybe even a foreign legal scholar. No one thought to look at the janitor mopping floors outside their offices. Until the night a man in a charcoal suit stood outside her closet as she emerged. He smiled. "Quite a draft, Grace." She met his gaze, unflinching. "You've got the wrong woman." He shook his head slowly. "I remember you. Whitmore versus Carroll. You tore a prosecutor apart on procedural grounds so smoothly, I thought you were untouchable. Guess I was wrong." "You're still wrong," she said. He leaned in slightly. "They're watching now. You should walk away." Grace gave him a tired smile. "I did walk away. Now I'm writing my way back." The man said nothing more. He stepped aside and disappeared down the hall. She returned to the closet and locked the door. The pages of the bill were still there, neatly stacked. They hadn't found the heart of it yet. But they would. And when they did, it would be too late to stop the fire. The State House air grew heavier as the committee hearing approached. News of the mysterious bill, now formally referred to as House Resolution 728, had begun leaking into national coverage. Overnight, it transformed from a legislative curiosity into a political powder keg. Cable news panels argued over its origins. Journalists flooded Little Rock with questions no one could answer. "Who is G.W.?" trended online. Legal scholars pored over the wording with surgical precision. Everyone agreed, the author was no amateur. This was the work of someone who knew the law like a second language. Grace moved silently through it all, unnoticed by most, except those beginning to connect dots. Maya had started walking through the halls with more caution. She no longer left any notes behind. She kept her distance from Grace during work hours. But her admiration only deepened. She watched as lawmakers debated fragments of a document she had seen in its raw form, birthed in a janitor's closet. The vote in committee was scheduled for Thursday. That Tuesday, a fire alarm went off at 10 minutes past 7 in the morning. A minor circuit overload in the West Wing. Routine. Temporary evacuation. Grace had been mopping the marble steps of the rotunda when the bells began to blare. She gathered her cart and moved calmly outside with the rest. When the building reopened half an hour later, she returned to find the lock on her closet broken. Her folders were still there, but someone had flipped through them. Papers slightly out of order. One legal pad missing. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She closed the door, locked it again with the second lock she had hidden under the floor trim, and sat down in the silence. She knew what would come next, and it did. That afternoon, her supervisor approached her while she was disinfecting the public bathrooms on the second floor. A white man in his 50s with a trimmed mustache and a badge that gleamed more than his eyes. "You've got a visitor downstairs," he said flatly. "Capitol Police." Grace nodded. "Let them wait. I'm not finished." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said they can wait. This floor is still dirty." She took another slow stroke with the mop. He didn't stop her. He didn't know how. When she finally descended to the lobby, two men in suits were waiting. One held a file, the other a badge. "Grace Whitmore," one said, "we have some questions regarding sensitive materials in your possession. It concerns unauthorized legal drafts being circulated under your initials." Grace raised her eyes, calm and level. "I haven't authorized anything." "Your initials match the anonymous submissions," the other said. "We have reason to believe you're the original author." Grace tilted her head. "Do you have proof?" The man holding the file glanced down. "We found your name tied to several older cases with similar legal language." Grace smiled. "So I have a legal writing style now?" "You're not authorized to participate in any form of legislative submission." Grace stepped forward. "I'm not employed in a capacity that requires your authorization." They hesitated. They had expected fear. They had found precision. Then Maya appeared. She walked across the lobby with firm steps, holding a printed statement in her hand. She looked them both in the eye. "This is a list of every bill submission made through Representative Rojas's office in the last 6 weeks," she said. "Each one followed the correct legislative process, including this one. Unless you're accusing an elected official of fraud, I suggest you move aside." Grace watched Maya stand her ground, her voice strong, her hands steady. The officers exchanged a glance. Then reluctantly they left. Grace turned to Maya, quietly stunned. "You didn't have to do that." Maya smiled. "Yes, I did. You gave me a voice. I'm going to use it." That night, Grace returned to the closet. She didn't hide the pages anymore. Instead, she taped the full draft of the bill to the wall, every section, every clause, every line, for anyone to see. And then, for the first time in a long time, she wrote her full name at the bottom of the preamble. Drafted by Grace E. Whitmore, J.D. She lit a small desk lamp, stepped back, and looked at it as if viewing the sunrise from the depths of a long, dark cave. The name was in the light now. And it was only the beginning. The morning sun spilled gold through the wide Capitol windows, casting long shadows across the white stone floors. A hush hung over the building like fog. Everyone knew what day it was. The committee hearing for House Resolution 728 had arrived. Grace dressed the same as she always did. Navy shirt, tan slacks, simple sneakers. The only difference was the way she walked. Slower, straighter. The burden she'd carried in silence for years had shifted into a purpose she no longer had to hide. Maya met her at the south entrance. Her eyes shimmered with excitement and nerves. "They released the docket publicly," she whispered. "Your name is on it." Grace gave a faint nod. "So be it." Inside the hearing room, tension buzzed beneath every whisper. Rows of aides, analysts, lobbyists, and reporters packed the gallery. The legislators, seated in their semicircle, adjusted microphones and clicked their pens with subconscious urgency. On the table before them sat the printed draft of the bill, now bearing a title: The Equal Sentencing and Restorative Justice Act. Authored by Grace E. Whitmore. No one could ignore it now. The mask had fallen. As the hearing was called to order, murmurs erupted the moment Grace entered the room. She took a seat near the back, unnoticed by some, impossible to ignore for others. Representative Rojas acknowledged her with a single respectful nod. The speaker's aide, seated near the panel, watched her with a blend of caution and curiosity. But no one dared remove her. No one could. The public hearing was open to all. Rojas began the session. "This bill," he said, voice even and measured, "addresses disparities in sentencing, strengthens access to legal defense, and introduces community-based rehabilitation strategies. The legal framework is constitutional. The analysis is sound. And the author is a woman whose credentials were erased by political maneuvering, not incompetence." He paused. "We owe her the courtesy of hearing this bill on its merits." One of the older legislators, Representative Clymer, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "Are we really going to entertain a submission from someone who's not an active member of the bar?" Rojas didn't flinch. "We're not entertaining her. We're honoring the truth she wrote. This bill didn't walk in here with privilege or party money. It came from someone who knows what justice costs." Silence followed. Then the questions began. The hearing turned into a courtroom. Challenges, criticisms, constitutional interpretation. Every line of the bill was dissected. But the power of the document spoke for itself. It had no fluff, no hidden agenda. Just the law, wielded like a scalpel in the hands of someone who once stood at the apex of the profession. Halfway through the hearing, someone asked the question directly. "Is Ms. Whitmore present?" A moment passed. Then Grace stood. Every head turned as she made her way to the front. Her walk was slow but sure. She stood before the committee and met each gaze head-on. "My name is Grace Whitmore," she said. "I am a former constitutional attorney. I have not held the title for many years, but I never stopped writing. I never stopped believing that the Constitution, when interpreted with conscience, is a living instrument of justice." A reporter in the back began typing furiously. She continued, "This bill is not about me. It's about the people whose names were never called, who sat in courtrooms without real defense, who were sentenced by a system that pretends to be blind while peeking through fingers laced with bias. This bill is for them." She stepped back. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. A deeper kind of silence settled, the silence of reckoning. The panel adjourned to deliberate. Grace returned to her seat. Maya grabbed her hand and didn't let go. They waited. 30 minutes passed. Then Representative Rojas returned to the microphone. "The committee has reached its decision." He cleared his throat. "House Resolution 728, the Equal Sentencing and Restorative Justice Act, will advance to the full chamber for a vote." A quiet wave passed through the gallery. Not cheers. Not applause. Something deeper. The sound of people realizing they had witnessed history being pulled back from the margins. Afterward, reporters swarmed Maya and Grace outside. Flashbulbs popped. Questions flew. Grace paused before speaking. "I don't care if my name is remembered," she said, voice firm. "What matters is that the law remembers who it's meant to protect." She turned away. No press conference. No selfies. Just the same quiet woman, walking home beneath a sun that finally saw her. The bill's passage through the committee was just the beginning. The weeks that followed saw a wave of political maneuvering, behind-the-scenes alliances, and, predictably, a barrage of opposition. The opposition was fierce, but as the bill advanced to the full chamber, something unexpected began to happen. The public, already captivated by the story of the bill's anonymous authorship, rallied behind it. Social media buzzed with messages of support. Local organizations began mobilizing their networks. Citizens penned letters to their representatives, urging them to stand on the right side of history. They rallied for justice, for fairness, for a system that didn't pick and choose who deserved a voice. Grace's name, once carefully kept out of the light, had now become a symbol. She had become a symbol. The full chamber session was set for the following month. The Capitol had been transformed into an arena, every seat in the legislative hall occupied, reporters filling the aisles. The press had descended like a storm, cameras at the ready. The halls of power had rarely seen such an electric atmosphere. On the morning of the vote, Grace stood in front of her closet, looking at the walls of her office. They had all been cleaned out by now. She had packed away every single trace of her old life as a constitutional lawyer, every award, every paper that once marked her rise to prominence. She was now fully entrenched in her new role, one that had been built from the dust of what others thought was buried. She was now a janitor no longer. Maya had come to the office early that morning, as was their routine. She was smiling but with a quiet intensity that spoke volumes. "Are you ready?" Maya asked softly. Grace didn't respond right away. She simply took one last look around her now empty space, her eyes scanning the surfaces where she had once wiped away the filth others had left behind. She had been erasing more than just dust. She had been erasing the stain of forgotten brilliance. "I was born ready," Grace replied. They left together, walking through the Capitol halls for the final time. As they passed, staff members, aides, and lawmakers alike stole glances at the janitor who had upended the status quo, the woman who had turned invisible spaces into arenas of change. The respect was there now, in their eyes, the recognition of her truth. Inside the chamber, the mood was somber. Representative Clymer had already delivered his speech, a sharp critique of the bill, denouncing it as overreaching, impractical, and fraught with consequences they couldn't yet foresee. His allies had lined up, ready to launch their own counterarguments, but the atmosphere had shifted. What had once been certain opposition now had the faintest tremor of uncertainty. Grace wasn't there to argue. She wasn't there to debate. She was there for the vote. And nothing would stop it. As the debate stretched on, one by one lawmakers took the floor to either support or oppose the bill. Some, like Rojas, spoke with unwavering conviction, reiterating that this was a matter of justice, of righting decades of wrongs within the legal system. Others, like Clymer, pointed to the risks, the potential fallout if certain provisions were passed. The final voice in the debate came from Representative Nolan, a woman known for her pragmatism. She stood, holding the bill in her hands, and turned to the chamber. "I am here to tell you that this isn't just about politics," she said, voice ringing through the hall. "This is about our legacy. About whether we continue to live in a country where the scales of justice are tipped by wealth and power, or if we restore them to their rightful place, to balance. This bill may not be perfect, but it's a start. And for once, I'm willing to bet on something that's not just easy, but right." There was a murmur through the chamber. No one was prepared for the quiet courage in her words. It was the shift the room had been waiting for. The Speaker of the House called for the vote. The ballots were cast. In the seconds that followed, time seemed to stretch. Representatives glanced at each other, nervous, unsure. Then the results flashed on the screen. The bill had passed. Grace sat quietly in the back of the chamber, her heart racing, her body still. Maya stood beside her, eyes wide in disbelief. The room erupted into mixed reactions, some cheering, others in hushed disbelief, but Grace didn't hear any of it. The sound of her own heartbeat was the only thing that filled her ears. She had done it. She had rewritten the rules. And now, the law would reflect the change she had fought for, the justice that had been denied for so long. Afterward, reporters flooded the steps of the Capitol, microphones and cameras aimed at Grace, but she didn't respond. Instead, she walked calmly away, her eyes set on the horizon. The nation's eyes were on her, but she didn't need their recognition. The work was done. The battle wasn't over. It was never over. But for the first time in years, Grace Whitmore could stand tall. She had not only written a bill, she had written history. The end. Moral lessons from She Wrote It in the Dark. 1. The power of quiet resistance. Grace Whitmore's story reminds us that sometimes, the most powerful acts of resistance come from those who appear powerless. 4 years, Grace worked in silence, unnoticed by the world, as a janitor in the halls of the Arkansas Capitol. Her situation could have been a cause for resignation, but instead, she chose to fight quietly, by writing. This teaches us that one's position in society does not define their ability to create change. Small, seemingly insignificant actions, like writing a bill or quietly working behind the scenes, can become monumental when fueled by conviction and purpose. The lesson here is that even in the face of adversity or underappreciation, the act of continuing to do meaningful work, regardless of recognition, can lead to profound transformation. Every quiet effort made toward change, no matter how small it seems at the moment, can grow into a movement, and sometimes resistance is most powerful when it is not loud or visible but persistent. 2. The value of knowledge and integrity. Grace's journey highlights the importance of retaining integrity and knowledge, even when circumstances try to erase them. Although her career as a constitutional lawyer was taken from her, she did not allow that to define her future. She held on to her legal expertise, quietly honing her craft in the shadows of the Capitol. When the time came, she used her knowledge to create a bill that would address systemic inequalities. This lesson reminds us that knowledge is an asset that no one can take from us. No matter how much life or the world tries to bury our potential or diminish our worth, the truth and our capacity for meaningful change cannot be erased. Integrity, the ability to stay true to one's principles and knowledge, will always have value, even when society forgets us or diminishes our efforts. 3. Justice is not given, it is fought for. Throughout the story, Grace's actions and her bill serve as a constant reminder that justice is not something that is handed to you by those in power. Justice must be fought for, often against systemic forces that aim to preserve the status quo. Grace fought for justice, not for herself but for those who had been failed by the system. She used her skills, her knowledge, and her resilience to craft a bill that addressed the disparities within the criminal justice system. The lesson here is that true justice does not come easily. It requires challenging systems of oppression, standing against powerful entities, and sometimes working in the shadows where no one can see. But justice is worth fighting for, and when done with perseverance, it can lead to change. 4. The importance of legacy and the written word. Grace's decision to finally put her name on the bill was a powerful act of reclaiming her legacy. For so many years she had been overlooked, forgotten, and erased from the narrative. Yet she chose to write herself back into history. She wrote not for glory but because she understood the importance of leaving behind a legacy that would continue to impact others long after her. This teaches us that our actions, especially those we do with care, diligence, and conviction, form the legacy we leave behind. The written word holds power as it can outlive us and inspire future generations. Writing our truth, whether in the form of stories, legislation, or personal expressions, gives us the ability to shape the world around us, even when we are not physically present. 5. Power can be found in the most unexpected places. Grace's role as a janitor in the Capitol was a far cry from the halls of legal power where she once stood. However, it was within this role that she found the time, space, and opportunity to create change. The fact that no one saw her as a threat allowed her to work in the shadows, unnoticed and free to write the very bill that would bring about significant change. Her humble position allowed her to be underestimated by those in power, but it also gave her the room to work without interference. This lesson shows that power does not always reside in the obvious places. Sometimes, the greatest sources of power are the most overlooked. Whether it's a janitor, a teacher, or a forgotten writer, there are ways to make a difference, even when society does not acknowledge your potential. Real power comes from within and can be found in unexpected moments and places if we choose to recognize it. 6. No one should be defined by their circumstances. Grace could have allowed her position as a janitor, a job often undervalued and overlooked, to define her. Instead, she refused to accept that her circumstances would determine her worth. Though society had relegated her to the margins, Grace defined herself by her knowledge, her ability, and her commitment to justice. The system tried to erase her, but she refused to be forgotten. This lesson teaches us that we are not the sum of our circumstances. No matter where we are in life or how the world tries to label us, we have the ability to rise above and redefine our own identities. We should never allow our current position, status, or the perceptions of others to limit our potential. 7. True change requires courage, not just skill. Grace's success wasn't simply about her skills as a lawyer or her ability to write a bill. It was about the courage to act on her beliefs, even when it meant stepping into the light and risking everything she had worked for. By revealing her identity, Grace exposed herself to further scrutiny, criticism, and risk, but she understood that change requires the courage to stand firm in what you believe, no matter the consequences. This teaches us that while skill and knowledge are essential, true change also requires an immense amount of courage. It takes bravery to step up, speak out, and push against the systems and structures that seek to hold us back. Change does not come easily, and it requires the strength to face opposition head-on and remain committed to the cause, no matter how daunting it seems. Conclusion. She Wrote It in the Dark serves as a powerful reminder that resilience, knowledge, and the quiet strength of the marginalized can bring about monumental change. Each lesson drawn from Grace's story emphasizes that we must never underestimate the power of a single voice, the importance of standing for justice, and the strength that comes from staying true to one's beliefs, even when the world seems to have forgotten you. The journey to change is long and filled with obstacles, but with persistence, courage, and an unwavering commitment to what is right, anything is possible. Disclaimer. The following story is entirely fictional and is intended for motivational, inspirational, and educational purposes only. Any resemblance to real-life events, people, or situations is purely coincidental. The characters and scenarios portrayed in this video are fictional creations, designed to provide moral lessons, inspire positive change, and encourage thoughtful reflection. This story is not meant to reflect actual events or individuals, but rather to illustrate themes of resilience, justice, and the power of perseverance. The messages conveyed are intended to empower viewers, spark meaningful conversation, and offer insights that can inspire personal growth and change. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through She Wrote It in the Dark. We hope Grace's story has inspired you to reflect on the power of resilience, the importance of fighting for justice, and the reminder that even the smallest actions can lead to monumental change. Your support means the world to us. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a powerful tale that might just inspire your own path to greatness. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Grace's story resonated with you the most? We'd love to hear your reflections. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to check out our other videos on the channel, where we share more motivational, inspiring, and thought-provoking content just like this. Until next time, stay inspired, keep striving, and remember, change starts